Two men are standing at the foot of Enoch's bed, and they are too big for the room. Their faces are burning like the sun. Enoch has just woken up, and the first thing he does is not pray. He is a grown man, a father with grown sons, and he pulls the blanket up to his chin. He calls for his children the way a frightened child calls for a parent. Then the two burning men speak, and they tell him to leave his house and his sons and everything he owns, because today he is going up. He does not come back down the same. There is a book, kept alive for 1,000 years by monks copying it by hand, that says the man who went up through those heavens returned wearing a different body. You have followed this man before. 3 episodes now, we have read his book from the ground. We watched 200 watchers come down a mountain. We watched their judgment. We watched a terrified father run to Enoch to ask whether his own newborn son was human. Every time the sky tore open in this series, someone sent for the same man. Enoch, 7th from Adam, the one who did not die. This time, we stop reading about him from below. We go up with him. I have to tell you something before we start, and I want to be honest about it, because it is the reason I held this episode back a week. There is a single sentence in this text, near the top of the climb, that I could not get out of my head. It is one line, describing what Enoch looked like after heaven was finished with him. I am not going to give it to you yet. I want you to earn it the way he had to, one heaven at a time. But I will say this now, so you feel the shape of what is coming. When you finally read that line, you may not be able to decide whether it is the most beautiful thing in the book or the most disturbing. Here is what we are actually looking at, and where it comes from, because on this channel that has to come first. The book is called Second Enoch. Some old titles call it the Book of the Secrets of Enoch. For most of the modern age, scholars only had it in one language, Old Church Slavonic, the church language of the medieval Slavic world. It survives in 2 shapes. A longer version scholars label J, and a shorter one they label A, kept alive across centuries by Slavic Christian monasteries, hand-copied by monks who had no idea a debate would one day hang on their handwriting. And that is exactly why the book was easy to dismiss for a long time. If a text only exists in medieval Slavic copies, a careful person is allowed to ask whether it was medieval Slavic invention. Then the ground answered. In 2009, a doctoral student at Leiden University named Joost Hagen was working through Coptic manuscripts pulled from the sand at Qasr Ibrim, an archaeological site in Nubia in the far south of Egypt. Fragments that had been sitting in publication since 1972, unrecognized. Hagen matched them to 2 Enoch, Coptic, not Slavonic. That single identification did something the Slavic copies alone never could. It proved there was an older Greek version standing behind everything, centuries before the monasteries. The book did not begin in the Middle Ages. It had already traveled from Greek into a corner of Christian Nubia while Europe was still early. Since that find, scholars mostly stopped calling it Slavonic Enoch. It earned a longer past. Hold on to that word for later. Nubia. The dating is where honest people still argue, and I am going to let them argue in front of you instead of pretending it is settled. Francis Anderson, whose translation sits in the standard scholarly collection, the Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, edited by James Charlesworth in 1983, argued the core of the book goes back very early, possibly the 1st century of our era. Christfried Bottrick pressed the same case. Their strongest clue is quiet and almost domestic. The text seems to assume the temple in Jerusalem is still standing, still running its sacrifices, and that temple was destroyed in the year 70. A writer inventing the book afterward would be describing a building that no longer existed. On the other side, Grant McCaskill and others stress how heavily Slavic hands reworked it over the centuries, so we cannot read the medieval copy as a clean 1st century photograph. Both things are true at once. An ancient core, a long and human chain of copying laid over it. The Coptic fragments pulled the whole conversation toward the older end. So this is not folklore. It is a real text with a real manuscript trail on 2 continents and a real fight over its age. Now we can climb. Picture the man again. Enoch is 365 years old in this story, which in the arithmetic of these books makes him old but not finished. The 2 enormous messengers set him on their wings, and the earth drops away. And I want you to hold the smallest detail from that bedroom, because it comes back. Before he is taken, Enoch is still a man in his own clothes, in his own house, smelling of his own life. Keep that. Keep the garment he is wearing when the wings lift. The first heaven is almost gentle. He meets the angels who govern the stars, and he is shown the great storehouses of the weather, where the snow is kept, and the dew, and the clouds, like a vast cellar behind the sky. It reads like a warm-up. It is meant to, because the second heaven is where the floor drops out. In the second heaven there is darkness, real darkness, described as worse than the darkness of earth, and in it, prisoners, angels, hanging, waiting, weeping. These are apostates, rebels who turned from God, and they have been suspended here in the dark for an amount of time no one will name, awaiting a judgment that has not yet come. Then something happens that the writer clearly wants to unsettle you with. The imprisoned angels see Enoch, a human being, walking freely through their prison, and they beg him. They ask this man to pray for them. Beings of heaven asking a mortal to intercede for them in the dark. Enoch's answer is human and helpless. "Who am I," he says, "a mortal man, to pray for angels?" He does not know his own weight yet. He does not know what he is about to become. Remember the man who cannot pray for angels. We are going to meet him again at the top, and he will not be that man anymore. The third heaven is where this book does something I have never quite gotten over. Enoch is brought up into paradise. At its center stands the tree of life, the tree from the very beginning of the human story, guarded, its fruit and its fragrance beyond describing, the place where, the text says, the Lord rests when he enters the garden. And you brace for the whole third heaven to be that: light, fruit, rest. Then Enoch is turned and taken to the northern region of the very same heaven, and shown a place of ice and fire and instruments of torture, a place prepared for the wicked. Heaven and hell are not in 2 different directions in this book. They are in the same heaven, a short walk apart. Paradise to the south, the place of torment to the north, sharing one sky. The reward and the ruin built into the same level, so that from the tree of life you could, in principle, look the wrong way. Sit with that for a second. One heaven, both ends of eternity. The fourth heaven turns mechanical and strange. Here Enoch is shown the actual machinery of time. The courses of the sun and the moon, the gates they rise and set through, the measured doors of the sky. This is the engine room of the calendar, and it matters more than it looks, for reasons I will hand to the next episode. And moving through this machinery are 2 creatures the text names plainly and never really explains: the phoenixes and the chalkadri. Enormous, winged, described with heads and colors that do not resolve into anything you can picture cleanly, singing as the sun moves. The writer names them the way you name something real that you saw and could not classify. He does not soften them into symbols. He just tells you they are there, flying alongside the sun, and moves on. Now we are more than halfway up, and this is the part that should reach in and hold you, because the fifth heaven is where our whole series collides with itself. In the fifth heaven, Enoch finds an army, a vast host of angelic soldiers, and every one of them is silent and downcast and in mourning. The text calls them the Grigori. That is simply the Greek word for watchers. These are the kin of the 200 who came down the mountain in our first 3 episodes, who took human wives and fathered the giants and broke the world. But these watchers did not fall. These are the ones who stayed, and they are standing in the fifth heaven grieving for their brothers who did not. An entire heaven of mourning over the exact event this series has been circling from the beginning. We watched the fall from the ground. Enoch is now standing among the ones who watched it from above, and could not stop it, and have not stopped weeping. The watchers you have feared for 3 episodes have relatives up here, and the relatives are in mourning. I have read a great deal of this literature, and that detail stopped me cold. Not because it is loud, because it is quiet. The book takes the monsters of our whole series and gives them grieving family in heaven, and then simply keeps climbing, as if it has not just rearranged the entire moral map underneath us. The sixth heaven pulls back to the scale of the entire cosmos. 7 bands of archangels, glorious and, the text notes, almost identical to one another, and their work is administration on a scale that is hard to hold in the mind. They order the stars. They govern the seasons and the years. They keep the rivers and the seas and the growing things. And, the text says, they keep the record of every human soul and every human deed, written down before the face of God. The runaway machinery of heaven turns out to be staffed, and it is keeping books on us, which is a strange and pointed thing to learn one heaven before a human being is handed a pen. And then the 7th. This is where the man breaks. In the 7th heaven, the fire begins. Ranks of cherubim and seraphim, and the wheels the tradition calls the Ophanim, the many-eyed thrones, a burning order of beings singing without stopping. Far off, across all of it, at a distance the text is careful to keep, Enoch sees the Lord on the throne. Every ounce of nerve leaves him. He falls on his face. He says he is undone. He says he is terrified. He cannot go a step further on his own. The man who has climbed through 6 heavens, who walked through an angelic prison and stood among a mourning army, comes to the top and collapses at the sight, and has to be carried the rest of the way. He arrives at the summit not as a conqueror. He arrives as a man at the absolute end of himself. And this is the exact moment the book has been building the whole climb toward. This is the line I made you wait for. At God's own command, the archangel Michael steps forward. Michael strips Enoch of his earthly garments, the clothes he woke up in, the clothes of the man in the bedroom, the last thing on him that still belonged to the ground. Gone. Then Michael anoints him with the oil of glory. The text stops to describe that oil with a care it gives almost nothing else. Its shining, it says, is greater than the greatest light, and its fragrance is like myrrh, like the dew of the morning. Then Michael clothes him, not in cloth, in the garments of God's glory. Newly anointed, newly robed, Enoch does the most human thing left to him. He looks down at himself. And here is the sentence. I looked at myself, and I had become like one of the glorious ones, and there was no observable difference. No observable difference. Read it slowly. A human being looks down at his own body and cannot find the seam where the man used to end and the angel begins. The transformation is not that he shines, though he shines. It is that the difference is gone. If you set him beside one of the burning beings that terrified him at the gate, you could not tell which one had, a few days ago, pulled a blanket up to his chin in fear. The garment he wore into heaven has been taken off him, and the garment he wears now is not a covering. It is what he is. That is the thing the church would eventually have to decide what to do with. A book where a man becomes indistinguishable from an angel and lives to write it down. Because writing it down is exactly what happens next. God summons an angel the text names Veravail or Revoil, an archive of heaven with all knowledge in him, and commands him to dictate. And for 30 days and 30 nights, without stopping, this newly transformed Enoch writes. The manuscripts differ on the number. Some say 360 books. Some say 366, and I will not pretend to know which, but the image is the same either way. A man who is no longer only a man, filling hundreds of books in a month with the knowledge of everything that is made. This is the book claiming its own origin. It is telling you where it thinks it came from. Not from a desk, from the seventh heaven, in a body that had just stopped being human. And then, the strangest mercy in the whole account. He is sent back, down, for exactly 30 days. This transfigured man, robed in glory, is returned to his own house, to his sons Methuselah and the others, for 1 month, to hand them the books and the instructions before he is taken up for good. Think about that month. A being who has no observable difference from an angel, sitting in his own home, at his own table, with his own children, for 30 measured days. The neighbor's sons, his grandsons, somewhere in that house. And then, at the end of the 30 days, heaven takes him back and does not return him. That is the last the earth sees of Enoch. I told you at the start there was one line I could not shake. It was that one. No observable difference. I have gone back to it more than once while making this, and I still cannot decide if I am reading a promise about what a human being can become, or a warning about how little distance there ever was between us and them. The book does not decide for you. It just shows you the man looking down at himself, and it lets you sit in the silence after. So why is a book like this not in your Bible? And here I owe you the honesty I promised, because this is precisely where other channels reach for a locked door and a whispering cardinal, and I do not think that is what happened. There was no order to hide it. Let me name that plainly and then set it down. This book was not buried by the Vatican. It was not smuggled out of a secret archive. It survived in the open because Slavic monks kept choosing to copy it century after century by hand. A book that is being hidden does not leave a manuscript trail across Nubia and the Slavic world. This one did. The real reasons it fell out of the canon are quieter, and there are several, layered on top of each other. Start with provenance. No one could say for certain who wrote it or exactly when, and it never lived in the Hebrew scriptures. It reached Christians only through a Greek and then Slavonic channel, off to the side of the main road. A text with no fixed address is hard to give a canonical seat. Then there is the content itself. Its map of the heavens, its ranks of angels, its phoenixes and its grieving watchers, was difficult to line up against anything else, and difficult teachings are exactly the kind copyists grow cautious around. And then there is the ending, which we have not touched, and which unsettled scribes most of all. That clue was sitting in the manuscript the whole time, in plain sight, and for a very long time almost no one wanted to build a doctrine on it. Because Second Enoch does not end with Enoch. It keeps going, past his ascent, down the generations to the very edge of the flood, and it tells the birth of another child, a boy named Melchizedek, born in a way that should not be possible, from a mother already dead, sitting up beside her corpse, fully formed, already speaking, with the badge of the priesthood marked on his chest. The same eerie glow the Book of Enoch put on the infant Noah, this book puts on the newborn Melchizedek, and then hands him to Michael to be carried up into paradise. A copyist could handle a man who climbed to heaven. A newborn priest who arrives out of a corpse, marked and shining, was one strange birth too many. So the circle closes, and it does not close where you think. We began this series reading Enoch's book from the ground, watching the sky tear open over other people. Tonight, we followed the man himself up through it, and watched him take off the last garment that made him one of us, and put on one that did not. We were taught to think of heaven as the place the good are rewarded. This book quietly says something harder. It says a human being can go up there and be changed so completely that when he looks down at his own hands, he cannot find himself anymore. No observable difference. That was the payload. That is why it made people nervous. And that strange, marked child sitting beside his dead mother, waiting for Michael, is another page they set aside. That is a birth we will open